What's up, everybody? Today I am talking about the cafeteria diet. We hear a lot about young adults going to school, going to college, and then they gain 15 pounds. I don't know if that's really true. I don't know how many freshmen really gain 15 pounds. It's probably less than that. But the whole idea is they go to college and they're surrounded by all of this really tasty food all the time. They're relying on snacks. They have a lot of stress. They're studying all the time. They need a lot of energy to think. They don't get a lot of sleep. They're surrounded by friends who are eating crap, and then there's a lot of social events. It's a really easy way to gain weight. It's a really bad environment to stay in shape. The only way to really stay in shape in college is if you're playing sports all the time, which I wasn't. I actually lost a lot of weight in college, but that's a totally different story. But today, I want to continue with Stephan Guyenet's book, The Hungry Brain. Great book. You can find a link in the description box below. I recommend you read it if you're interested in obesity research and nutrition and all that. But one of the things he talked about in his debate with Gary Taubes, and I'll make another video about that, is the cafeteria diet that they use with rats. So here's how this study worked. They did this back in like 2010, 2011, and they had rats with 4 different diets, right? So some rats got standard chow, which was just typical food. I'm not sure exactly what it consisted of. And then they had a high fat, a low fat, yeah, they had standard chow, and then they had low fat with a lot of grain. And then they had low fat with a lot of sucrose, a lot of sugar. Then they had high fat, and then they had cafeteria diet, which was high fat, high sugar. So they were giving them stuff like Hershey's Kisses, Cocoa Puffs, and other candy and other stuff that contain a lot of fat and sugar, which I argue is the real driver of obesity. People aren't binging on Starburst. I mean, I suspect there might be a few cases. They're binging on Snickers, right? It's that combination that you want to avoid. Anyway, so they took these rats and they fed them this stuff for 10, 12 weeks. I think it was 10 or 11 weeks. It doesn't take that long to make a rat fat. And so when they looked at the results, the rats that gained the most weight by far were the ones that had the diet that consisted of the processed food, the junk food, right? Like the Fruit Loops. Rats will just gorge on Fruit Loops if you give it to them. I don't know why, even though it's mainly sugar, but the Cocoa Puffs and the other processed food that they were given compelled them to eat a lot. And so when you look at the graph and you look at the weight gained, the low-fat group and the high-sugar groups actually gained the least, which is somewhat surprising. The high-fat group actually gained more than the high-sugar group, which kind of contradicts this whole idea that insulin is the driver of obesity, because you would predict that a diet low in insulin secretion, which is the high-fat diet, would be the one that leads to less weight gain, right? Because you have less insulin coming out of the pancreas, less insulin driving less energy into the cells, less adiposity, right? But that's not what they found. In fact, they found that the most liver damage was in the high-fat, high-carb diet, which was the cafeteria diet. But they also found a lot of liver damage in the high-fat diet, and some liver damage in the high sucrose diet. All of them had some liver damage. All of them gained weight because they were in caloric excess, right? But I found it interesting that the diet that produced the least weight gain and the least liver damage was the one high in sucrose, and they were consuming like 30% of their calories from sucrose. That's a lot. It's way more than what most Americans are consuming. I mean, if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, you'd have to eat 700 calories from pure sugar. That's 150, 170 grams a day of just pure sugar. In other words, that would be like 3 to 4 cans of regular soda a day, and you're only eating 2,000 calories. So that's a lot. That's a lot. That's more than what most people are consuming. But the whole point of this was to show which diet was the most obesogenic, which one made the rats gain the most weight. And the one by far, if you look at the data, and I'll put a link to a great analysis that Evelyn Akarpsane did. She has all the graphs there, and you can look at it, was the high-fat, high-carb one. And this is kind of a warning to anybody who's trying to lose weight, anybody who's obese. It's also a warning to parents who have children who are consuming this kind of food, that those kinds of foods that have a good combination of fat and sugar are probably the most dangerous and the most lethal. Now, you can blame soda, you can blame Skittles. I don't think that's what's really driving obesity. I think what it is like the tasty cakes and the donuts and the chips and the crackers. And if you think about it, almost every processed food is a combination of fat and sugar. So let me give you tonight's example. This one right here. See, can you see that? Take a look. Potato chips. These are one of the most overeaten foods. I never got into potato chips. I bought this for another video, so I'm just kind of like nibbling on it. Really, potato chips are greasy. They're not that great. I've never binged on potato chips. It just goes to show that everybody has different tastes. But my point is, people aren't binging on potatoes, and they're not binging on oil. But when you combine the potato with the oil, that's what's really driving obesity. And it's not necessarily soda, and it's not necessarily dates. Where are my dates? I have dates in here somewhere. But that's not the one that's driving obesity. It's that horrible triad of salt, sugar, and fat. And that's what food manufacturers are looking for. They're looking for that perfect texture, that perfect taste, that winning combination. Think about the Oreo. The Oreo, they've sold billions upon billions upon billions of Oreos. In fact, I had an Oreo this week, right? That's me. One of my patients had an Oreo. It was like Oreo with marshmallow. I like trying new stuff. It was really tasty, and it probably cost them millions of dollars to manufacture that. But what is an Oreo? It's a combination of fat and sugar, right? There's sugar in the middle, and then there's fat in the cookie, right? That's what makes it so addictive. That's what makes it so good. So I found that study to be super interesting, and it directly contradicts what people like Gary Taubes and even Robert Lustig are saying, that it's all about insulin, it's all about the carbs, it's all about fructose. No, it's not. What I think it is, it's reward. That when we eat foods that are very rewarding and that are very tasty, our brains tell us to eat more of it. Because remember, our brains were designed long ago. I don't care how old you think humans are, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, it doesn't matter. Until recently, food was scarce, and our brains were designed to seek out food, especially food that was really high in fat and really high in sugar. Okay. And so our brains think that Oreos are really scarce, but we know better. It's not. And that's where brain control comes into play, because you know better. You know that Oreos are not scarce. You can go down. There's like 10 grocery stores within 10 minutes of where I live, not to mention all the gas stations, not to mention the fact that I can use Instacart to order Oreos if I'm too lazy to get off my butt and go and get Oreos anyway. And there's like 15 different types of Oreos now. It's crazy. But my point is, it's not necessarily insulin that's the factor. What it is access to cheap, tasty food that we want to consume more of. That's why you can't always trust your brain, because your brain wants stuff that's really tasty, but you have to know better, and you kind of have to pull the reins on the brain. If you don't, your brain's going to lead you down the wrong path because it doesn't know any better. You can't download a new OS into your brain. Like the other night, I had to upgrade my Windows because it was time for a Windows upgrade, and it worked for once. And now my OS is operating really well, and it's compatible with all these apps and blah blah blah. It's great. I'm glad I did it. You can't do that with your brain. The only thing you can do is start reprogramming your thoughts and reprogramming your behavior. I think that's the only answer we have to the overeating crisis, to the obesity epidemic, if you want to call it that. That's really your only chance. You can't modify the environment very much, because unless you want to go live in the middle of the desert where there's nothing to eat, which I don't think anybody would want to do, but that would be pretty drastic. You can keep it out of the house, but I binged for 8 or 9 years, and it was very easy for me to drive to the Walmart, which was open 24/7, and buy whatever I wanted. It just wasn't that hard. So keeping it out of the house, that might help a little bit. But when I was really motivated to binge and really motivated to overeat, it was nothing for me to get in the car, go to Walmart, get what I want, and binge. Okay, so that's why I think keeping the kitchen empty is actually a bad idea. But I'll talk about that another time. Anyway, there was another similar study that they replicated with obese patients in a hospital. I'm not sure where the hospital was. I'm not sure which year the study was done, but they kept the obese people in a controlled environment, which is what you really need to do these studies. You need to know exactly what's going in, exactly what's going out. And that's what they were able to do. They put all of these foods in vending machines, and they knew exactly what the obese people were eating. That's the problem with obesity research a lot of times, is that you're relying on questionnaires to determine what they were eating, and you don't know how reliable those are. And what we know is that obese people, I'm not trying to like shame obese people here, but they underestimate how much they're eating, and they're not going to report a binge. Even if it's anonymous, you probably don't want to report that you binge. You want to say that you did the right thing. So anyway, it's just one limitation of modern research methods. But they had these obese patients in a hospital ward for 2 weeks, and sure enough, the ones that gained the most weight were the ones that were exposed to the most palatable food. Okay, duh, makes sense. If you give obese people free access to all of this tasty food and donuts and cakes, they're going to overeat it. Why? Because their brains get a hit every time they eat it. They experience greater levels of reward when they eat that kind of stuff than when I eat it. But the good news is there was a time when I got a lot of reward doing that. Now I don't get a lot of reward. I can't imagine eating 6 donuts in a row anymore. I can't imagine how that would make me feel emotionally, physically. It's just something I can't do. So anyway, back to the cafeteria on the freshman 15. Why is a cafeteria diet so obesogenic? Why does it make us gain so much weight? Because it's tasty, it's easy to overeat, and our brains give us a lot of reward. And that's the whole concept of reinforcement, is that when our brains experience pleasure, it makes us more motivated to seek it again. That's what reinforcement is. How motivated are you to go seek it? So when you walk into a college cafeteria and you see fast food here, fast food there, and candy bars, and it's really awful, actually. They don't do a good job of feeding our young adults good food, but anyway, it is what it is. And you're under stress and you don't have a lot of sleep, bam, like it's just a perfect recipe. So that's what the cafeteria diet is. If you want to start losing weight, start taking control of what you eat, you need to be super conscious when you're eating that stuff. I'm not saying you should never eat it again. I mean, I've got chips here, I've got trail mix, I've got energy bars. I've binged on all of that at some point, and I don't think it's realistic to never eat it again. I think what you need to do is be hyper vigilant when you do eat it, because it's very easy to get carried away. When you start eating a combination of oil, salt, and sugar or starch, in the case of potato chips, it's really easy to overeat. It's really easy to deceive yourself. That to me is the big takeaway. When you're eating stuff like boiled potatoes and spinach, you don't need to be as conscious, right? Because who wants to overeat on boiled potatoes? There's no reward there. All it is just plain starch. But I mean, maybe you would. I wouldn't. Maybe if you have like weird pregnancy cravings and some. Anyway, the other takeaway was quit blaming fructose. Fructose is found in sugar. It's the kind of sugar that makes stuff sweet. Not all sugar is sweet. Like lactose and milk, it's not really sweet. Glucose is not very sweet. Dextrose is not very sweet. It's fructose, and that's what you find in sugar-sweetened beverages like juice and soda. Basically, what you find in anything that's sweet, it's fructose. That's what we want. In nature, you only find that in honey. That's why hunters and gatherers, when they find honeycombs, they take the whole honeycomb and they just take their hand and they're just like that, because they love the fructose. But it tells you that we're naturally designed to consume and metabolize fructose, right? I'm not saying you should go drink 3 or 4 cans of soda. I just don't think that's the primary driver of obesity. I think it's those concoctions of fat and sugar all in one. That's the main danger. Too much dietary fat in your diet is probably not a good idea. I don't know what the ideal amount of fat is, but a lot of fatty foods that we hear about, like coconut oil and avocados, avocado toast, anybody, nut butters, olive oil. I actually think those are really overrated in terms of nutrition. They don't have a lot of vitamins. They don't have a lot of minerals, and it's so easy to overeat that stuff. All you're doing is adding tons of calories to your food when you do that. I'm not saying you should eat a super low-fat diet like the Ornish diet. It's like 10% calories. That's probably too little. For me, I do well when I eat high carb, high protein, and then I kind of keep the fat to a minimum. I eat some salmon, some fish oil, some other fats and like the energy bars and stuff, but I try not to overdo it. Because too much fat in the diet, like this rat study shows, can actually impair liver function. In fact, the livers and the rats that ate the high fat diet were worse than the ones in the high sucrose diet. So take that keto, take that high fat. It was not only did they gain more weight, but they actually had more damage in their liver, and they also had more damage in the fat cells, which is not good for the high fat argument. So I don't know. Who knows what Dr. Lustig and Gary Taubes are doing to their bodies when they do that? But anyway, I thought the study and the commentary were very interesting about this. It goes to show that maybe sugar isn't as bad as we thought. Not saying we should binge on it, but maybe it's not the culprit in obesity. It also shows that a really palatable diet that has a lot of fat and a lot of sugar is probably the most obesogenic diet. That's what people are eating every day. And also that the cafeteria diet was 46% fat, 44% carbs, also very little protein, which I think is interesting. When you look at really processed food, there's not a lot of protein in it. And I think that's a problem because protein is more satiating, way more satiating than fat. But when they process these foods, they get rid of all the protein. I think that's something to explore. That's just a hunch that I have, that low protein foods stimulate more overeating. So get your protein. Anyway, cafeteria diet, try to avoid it. If you're a young adult, you're a college student, or you work at Google, or you work any place where there's just this giant food court nearby, just be hyper conscious of this stuff. That's my best advice for you. Even at places like Panda Express, you can still get the vegetables and the rice, and it's probably not too bad. Doesn't mean you should go to Panda Express. Anyway, I think that's all I want to say about this. I have more to say about Hungry Brain. That's the name of the book that I'm reviewing. I don't have it open right now, but Hungry Brain, Stephan Guyenet. I will put some links in the description box below if you want more commentary, and if you want links to Dr. Guyenet's research that he's done over the years. Very good document to look at. So I'll see you next time, and yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found it somewhat educational and entertaining too. Bye.